Do you remember the one-tailed beast from Naruto? The giant Tanuki sealed inside Gaara. That loud, violent one called Shukaku. He never stops talking, always angry, and never listens to anyone. But here's the worst part. If Gaara falls asleep, Shukaku takes over. It's the nightmare version of sharing a room. Sleep, and you might die. Now here's a twist. That name, Shukaku, did you know there was a real monk with the same name? According to temple records in Gunma, a monk named Shukaku brought home a magical teapot. It could pour endless tea and never run dry. They called it the Bunbuku Chagama, the teapot of shared blessings, and it inspired a folktale starring a shape-shifting Tanuki. A monk buys a kettle from a junk shop, but it turns out to be a disguised Tanuki. The monk gets scared and sells it off. The junk dealer, more kind-hearted, gives it a home. The Tanuki repays him by performing tricks at a roadside show. They get rich, but in the end, the Tanuki just gets tired. See? This Tanuki isn't a monster. He's warm, loyal, even a little human. Very different from the Shukaku in Naruto. Tonight, I'll share a laid-back and chill old tale about that Tanuki.
Bunbuku Chagama, Masao Kusuyama. Long ago, in the land of Kozuke, there stood a temple in Tatebayashi called Morinji. The priest of this temple was especially fond of the tea ceremony, and every day he would delight in collecting all kinds of unusual tea utensils, fiddling with them just for fun. One day, as the priest was returning from an errand in town, he came across a harmlessly shaped chagama at a curio shop. Delighted, he bought it at once and brought it back to his room, where he displayed it. How about this? Isn't it quite a fine chagama? He would show it off to every visitor who came by, full of pride. That evening, as usual, the priest placed the chagama in the drawing room and sat beside it, dozing off. Before long, he was sound asleep. The room was so quiet that the young acolytes began to wonder what was going on. They crept over and peeked through a crack in the shoji sliding door. To their amazement, the chagama placed near the priest, seated on a futon, suddenly began to stir. What's this? They thought, as a head popped out of the chagama, followed by a thick tail and 4 legs. It slowly began to walk around the room, just like that. The young monks were stunned. They burst into the room, shouting, "Oh no, the chagama has transformed. Priest, the chagama is walking around." All of them shouted in confusion and alarm, raising quite the commotion. Woken by the noise, the priest rubbed his eyes and, rubbing them, scolded, "Enough already. What are you all yelling about?" "But priest, just look over there. The chagama is walking around." The young monks pointed in that direction, and the priest turned to look. But by then, the chagama had already returned to its original form, having become the original chagama before they knew it. There was no head, no legs, no tail. Just the chagama, calmly sitting atop the futon, as if nothing had happened. The priest frowned. Really now, There's a limit to how much nonsense one can spout. But it's strange. We really did see it walk. Muttering in disbelief, the boys approached, looking puzzled, and tapped the Chagama. It gave a firm, metallic can. You see, just an ordinary Chagama. And here I was, enjoying a perfectly nice nap. What a way to ruin the mood. Scolded harshly, the young monks slumped away, mumbling complaints as they went. The next day, the priest said, I didn't go through all the trouble of buying that Chagama just to stare at it. I think I'll give it a proper test today. And so he filled it with water. Surprisingly, although it was a small Chagama, it gulped down a handpail full of water in one go. The priest thought, that's odd. But seeing nothing else unusual, he poured in more water and placed it over the eerie hearth. Before long, as the bottom of the pot began to warm, the Chagama suddenly cried out, hot, and leapt out of the hearth. In the blink of an eye, a Tanuki's head appeared, along with 4 legs and a thick tail. It started lumbering across the tatami floor. Ah, cried the priest, jumping up in surprise. This is bad. The Chagama has transformed. Somebody, help. Hearing the commotion, the young monks cried, there it is again. And they came rushing in with headbands tied tight, wielding brooms and dusters. But by the time they arrived, the Chagama had already reverted to its original state, sitting calmly on the futon. When tapped, it made the same can sound. Still pale and startled, the priest thought, I thought I'd gotten my hands on a wonderful Chagama. But what a troublesome thing it's turned out to be. What should I do with it? Just then, from outside the temple gate, a voice called, rags and scraps, old goods. Perfect timing. A junk dealer. The priest said this. I'll just sell this troublesome Chagama to him and be done with it. He had the dealer summoned right away. The junk man took the Chagama in his hands, rubbed it gently, gave it a tap, flipped it over to inspect the bottom, and said, this is quite a fine piece. And so he purchased the Chagama, placed it into his basket of scraps, and carried it away. The junk dealer who had bought the Chagama returned home still grinning to himself. This is quite the find, something you don't come across these days. If I can just find a rich collector who's into fine wares, I ought to fetch a nice price for it. Muttering to himself like that, he carefully placed the Chagama beside his pillow that night and went straight to sleep. But sometime past midnight, he heard a voice calling out from somewhere. Excuse me, junk man. Junk man. Startled, he woke up, and there, sitting by his pillow, was the very same Chagama, having sprouted a hairy head and a thick tail before he knew it. The junk dealer leapt up in shock. Whoa, What the? The Chagama has transformed. Now, Mr. Junk Dealer, there's no need to be so alarmed. How could I not be? Anyone would be shocked to see a Chagama grow fur and start walking around. Just what in the world are you? I'm called the Bunbuku Chagama. In truth, I'm a Tanuki who took the form of a Chagama. One day I was out playing in a field when I was suddenly chased by 5 or 6 men. With no other choice, I transformed into a Chagama and rolled into the grass. But those men found me again. "Hey, it's a Chagama," they cried. "We've found something good. Let's sell this off somewhere and use the money to buy ourselves a feast." So I was sold to a second-hand shop and put on display at the storefront, where I had to endure all sorts of cramped and miserable treatment. They didn't feed me anything at all, and I nearly starved to death until I was finally purchased by the priest at the temple. At the temple, I was given a hand pail full of water at last. I gulped it down in one go and breathed a sigh of relief. But no sooner had I done that than they placed me on the irori hearth and began to roast me from the bottom up. That truly gave me a scare. I never want to go through that again. You seem like a kind and good-natured person, so would you please let me stay here with you for a while? I promise I'll make it worth your while. Well, letting you stay is no trouble at all. But what do you mean by making it worth my while? Oh, I can perform all sorts of fun tricks as a sideshow and make you plenty of money. Huh? Tricks, you say? What kind of tricks are we talking about? Well, for starters, I'll do some light-footed tightrope walking and perform the Bunbuku Chagama dance. You should give up being a junk dealer and become a showman instead. Starting tomorrow, the money will roll right in. The junk dealer, hearing all this, became completely fired up. And just as the Chagama had advised, he gave up the junk business altogether. The next morning, as dawn broke, the junk dealer got to work on preparing the show. He built a sideshow booth in a busy part of town, put up a painted sign showing Bunbuku Chagama walking the tightrope and dancing in the light, and took on all the roles himself: showmaster, ticket taker, and announcer. Seated at the entrance, he called out in a booming voice, "Step right up, step right up. It's the amazing Bunbuku Chagama. Grown fur, grown legs. Behold the marvelous feats of tightrope walking and merry dancing. It's the talk of the town. Reputation, reputation." People passing by, intrigued by the strange sign and curious sales pitch, began gathering one after another at the booth. Soon the place was packed full. At last, the Yoshigi clappers sounded, the curtain rose, and out waddled Bunbuku Chagama from backstage to make its appearance. What the audience saw was beyond imagination. A large Chagama, now sprouting arms and legs, transformed into a creature. Everyone gasped in wide-eyed amazement. And that wasn't even the most surprising part. The Chagama creature held a parasol and opened a fan in both hands, stepped carefully onto the rope, and balanced its heavy body with rhythm. It performed an entire tightrope routine successfully. The audience was even more impressed and broke into thunderous applause that nearly shook the walls of the booth. From then on, no matter what kind of trick Bunbuku Chagama performed, the crowd was delighted every time. I've never seen a show this entertaining in all my life, people would exclaim to one another as they left. News of Bunbuku Chagama spread quickly, and not just the locals, but folks from distant provinces came all the way, wearing straw sandals, no less, just to see it. Every day and every night, the booth was filled to the brim, and before long, the junk dealer had become a rich man. Eventually, the man thought, making money endlessly like this thanks to Bunbuku Chagama has no real end. It's time to let it rest. One day he called Bunbuku Chagama to him and said, "I've made you work and perform so much up to now, and thanks to you I've become quite a wealthy man. They say human greed has no limits, but it's not good to get too greedy. So today will be your final show. I'm going to return you to Morinji Temple, where you belong. And I'll ask the priest not to be placed on the irori and roasted like an ordinary Chagama. Instead, he'll treat you as a treasured item, laid upon a brocade futon, and allowed to live a peaceful life as an honored elder. How does that sound?" Bunbuku Chagama replied, "Yes, that sounds lovely. I'm quite worn out myself. A little rest would be most welcome." So the man took half of the money he had earned from the show, added it to the Chagama, and brought them both to the priest at Morinji Temple. The priest received them. "Well, well, how very kind of you." And from that point on, Bunbuku Chagama, perhaps exhausted from it all, never danced again. Nor did it grow limbs or do anything strange. It became one of the temple's most treasured artifacts, and, they say, remains there to this day.